Iran's supreme leader has lashed out at President Trump, accusing him of being responsible for the deaths of over 3,000 protesters. I mean, that is extraordinary. Not extraordinary in the fact that he's accusing Trump of being responsible for the deaths. It's an admission from the Ayatollah that they have killed thousands of protesters, or thousands have at least died in the streets. So in a series of social media posts, despite a nationwide internet blackout, the Ayatollah accuses President Trump of being a criminal who fueled nationwide demonstrations. They previously said that it's a US Mossad operation on the streets of Iran. In response, the US president told Politico that, quote, it's time for new leadership in Iran. Meanwhile, it's being reported that the regime is looking to permanently sever itself from the global internet. And protests have also continued outside the Iranian embassy in London tonight, following clashes with police last night, which saw 14 arrests and multiple police officers injured. I will add to that, not just coppers injured, allegedly, also many protesters. The scenes and the pictures of people bloodied and bruised and slammed on the floor with their heads bleeding was a shock. And we also have some breaking news this evening as well, entering the GB newsroom. Channel 12, citing senior American officials, says that a US attack on Iran will absolutely happen and is only a matter of time, with Washington actively preparing for action. And GB News also understands the Iranian regime has been using chemical weapons on its own people, and I think that comes from a bit of bombshell information from Bill Ramble last night on Alex Armstrong's show, who has exclusive reports on the ground about citizens being exposed to some sort of toxic gas, potentially, which they then died from days later. That's still unconfirmed. We are trying to verify that. But
there's nothing more important than keeping your money and your identity safe online. And with so many VPN options available, choosing the right one can be pretty daunting. But this video's sponsor, ExpressVPN, is making the choice easier for GB News viewers. ExpressVPN is offering up to 75% off, plus 4 extra months free. That's top-level security from just £2.49 a month, and you're covered by their 30-day money-back guarantee. So just click the link in this video's description or scan the QR code now. Remember, when you're online, you are often sharing personal data, so hackers can steal your information, your passwords, your photos, and your bank details in just seconds. But ExpressVPN encrypts your connection, making it virtually impossible for hackers to access your personal information. So why choose ExpressVPN? Well, it couldn't be easier to use. With just one click, you are protected. And ExpressVPN uses military-grade AES 256 encryption, which is the same standard trusted by the US government to guard their classified information. With their new tiered plans, you can protect up to 14 devices at once and manage passwords securely. Live chat support is available 24/7, and it typically connects you in under a minute with a real person. Click the link in this video's description or scan the QR code to get up to 75% off ExpressVPN, plus 4 months extra for free. Start protecting yourself today with ExpressVPN.
in the meantime, joining me in Washington to discuss this is my panel, political commentator Hillary Fordwich and the Democrat strategist Mally Smith. It keeps saying Malbert there, Mally, but I'll call...
My full government name.
Yeah, well, as I said, if you keep behaving yourself, and I'll keep calling you Mally, otherwise we'll go to Malbert. Hillary, what's your take on what we've seen in Iran so far? Another big question, we're talking about Greenland. Will the US invade Greenland? Will the US strike Iran?
Well, with regard to Iran, what I would like to know is all the feminists, especially all those in the Democratic Party in the US, why are they so silent now? You see women in the streets there, so brave, taking off their hijabs, throwing them on bonfires, burning them, and we have silence from the feminists. So I think that's actually a shame, it's hypocritical, and it's pitiful. And I think that those who have had their lives saved, particularly that 26-year-old who was going to be hanged, and so purportedly 800 others that were going to be hanged, that President Trump has now saved them, they have their lives saved by him, and I hope they're grateful for the rest of their lives. Will we go into Iran? I don't think we'll ever have boots on the ground, but given that the Ayatollah has been, and their regime have been not only detrimental to human rights, detrimental to the West, the Persian people were very Western-oriented, and Iran was a thriving nation before this takeover about 47 years ago with the deposition of the Shah. So I think this is great news. I just wish all those feminists in the West would stand up and hear their voices heard and stand with those women of Iran.
Yeah, well said. The exiled Crown Prince, Reza Pahlavi, was in Washington yesterday. I asked him a question question about why it's in Britain's interest for the regime to fall, he said what we all know pretty much, which is there are Iranian sleeper cells all over the West.
Everywhere.
MI5,
yes.
Mali, have said that in the past recent years they foiled 20 Iranian terror plots in the UK. So, I mean, would you agree it's in everyone's interest, the West's interest, for this regime to fall?
I mean, I think it's in everyone's interest that we have a new Iranian government. They're a pariah that, funds attacks on the West. They destabilize the region. The question to me, though, is what happens after a strike? What happens after we topple the Iranian regime? Let's say we go in there and we do a strike that we think can topple the regime, which if we decide to do that, militarily, we are the best in the world, so that's something we'd be able to accomplish. The days and weeks after, the months and years after, what does Iran look like? We've seen this with Iraq, with Afghanistan, with Syria, that regime change is inherently messy. The first days are the best. You have the folks on the ground who are cheering because it's a terrible regime falling. That's great. Yeah. But are they prepared to create a government after that? And the other thing that worries me about this, though, is even though I'm hesitant on, what does regime change look like, I'm also hesitant what Iran might do with an existential threat to their leadership. You got to think the leaders in Iran are looking at this and say, if we fall and we lose power, this means we're going to get killed, right? So you have these folks on the ground who they're going to do everything they can to remain in power, which unfortunately for the people of Iran means killing, citizens and just brutal tactics.
Well, they can go to Russia and play Scrabble with Assad.
Reports suggest tonight that around 17,000 Iranians have been killed on the streets of Iran, which is horrific. Reem Ibrahim, you're down the line in London. Thanks for sticking with us. What's the latest that you've seen outside the embassy in London tonight? It was kicking off majorly last night. Any update this evening?
Well, we've almost certainly seen more people protesting, and it seems as though those numbers keep getting bigger and bigger. We have seen many women actually outside of the embassy protesting, talking about this in this particular instance. I think what's fascinating is the focus on the very people that are losing their lives, the incredible bravery. Can we just focus on that for a moment? The absolute incredible bravery of the Iranian people that are out there on the streets, fighting for their freedom, fighting for the future of their country. I'm particularly interested by the specific names that we've talked about. People like Rubina Amanian, who is 23 years old, the same age as me, and was shot dead in the head on the streets of Iran by the Iranian police. So it's really rather abysmal, the situation that we're in at the moment. I think what's interesting is this is almost certainly a regime on its last legs. We are seeing them effectively scramble to survive, and I think that what has been said on the panel already is absolutely true. In the UK and, of course, in the rest of the world, there are people shouting freedom for Iran. They are showing their solidarity with those people that are so extraordinarily brave, fighting for their country and fighting for liberty. I am so abhorred by what has happened. I think that the sort of 18,000 or so people that have been also arrested and sentenced to death without trial also need to be talked about, because we're talking about an awful lot of people. This is almost certainly a regime on its last legs, and I hope and I think that many Iranians actually want the US to intervene. I know an Iranian based in London that has said the only way we will get regime change is if Trump gets involved, is if the United States gets involved. What's also interesting is this conversation about what happens next. What we don't seem to understand here is that the Iranian people are extraordinarily liberal. They have Western values, and I think that what is different about this than in any other situation, if we were to liberate Gaza, for example, many of the people that live in Gaza have been brainwashed, are not very well educated. That is a very, very different situation in Iran. The Iranian people are very well educated. They understand what liberal democracy means, and they want it.
Interesting. Yeah, Reza Pahlavi, the exiled crown prince who was in DC, he was saying yesterday, we are ready to take over. Not permanently. He said, look, I have a transition team in place. I will be the transition. We have a 200-page document which we will present to President Trump. We're ready to take over and bring democracy back to Iran. I mean, as you'd expect, he sounded pretty confident, and he was quite organised with the press conference and so on, a big team around him. And from what I've seen on social media, maybe not the true litmus test of what Iranian people think, but just swathes and swathes of Iranians on social media saying, we want Reza Pahlavi. He says he's ready. Whether that's the case, we'll have to wait and find out. Reem, thank you very much. Stick with us. Let's get the take now of senior Iran analyst Dawn, Omid, sorry, at Dawn, Omid Memariam. Omid, thanks for your company. Just before we start anything else, can you verify or give us any more information on this report tonight that there are some sort of chemical weapons doing the rounds in Iran?
We have to be very careful about unsubstantiated reports, particularly when it comes to chemical weapons or unconventional weapons like this, because we have a history of using these type of claims to be proven wrong. And I think we have to be very, careful about this type of claims. But at the same time, we know that the rhetoric between President Trump and the Iranian Supreme Leader has been very harsh over the past 24 hours. And it's obvious that the U.S. is getting ready to do something, take some actions against Iran. U.S. carriers are coming from jet carriers is coming from China Sea to the Persian Gulf to the Middle East, and the U.S. Seems to be calculating what are the costs of a military attack against Iran. That's for a fact. Even though the President Trump said that Iranians stopped executing 800 people, even though he thanked them for what they have done, even though there is no reports of scheduling executing 800 people. At the same time, we know that President Trump promised Iranian people to support them, and even though it's too late for that, but all the indicators tell us that one major action coming from the U.S. Is basically on the way. And despite what you said about the chemical weapons and all that, I think the U.S. is going to, in some sort of way, respond to what has happened the past few weeks.
Yeah, and why do you think President Trump is blowing hot and cold? One minute he's saying to the protesters, don't worry, help is on the way. The next day he's saying, well, actually, I've heard that they've cancelled the execution, so, that sounds all right for now. And then, of course, today he responded to the Ayatollah by saying it's time for a new leader. Why do you think he is blowing hot and cold? Is that intentional, or is that just President Trump being Trump?
There is no hot and cold. Here's the core of this issue. Protesters in Iran, people, democracy seekers, freedom seekers are never the focus of any country's foreign policy agenda. President Trump said that we are locked and loaded, we're going to support Iranian protesters. He didn't. It was supposed to deter the Iranian government to use violence against Iranian protesters. It actually accelerated the situation. Right now, we have a number of 12,000 people dead, and so whatever happens, whatever President Trump does in the next few days, it's not going to help all those people who are killed. That's one thing aside. The U.S. and Iran, have many issues, and they are not friendly governments. There are so many grievances that the U.S. government has with the Iranian government. Chief amongst them is Iran's nuclear program, then it's Iran's missile program, Iran's proxy groups in the region, and many others. So we knew that in the past few months, the U.S. government is getting sick and tired of Iranians not negotiating, not coming with a solution how to deal with the situation. So they somehow neutralized Iran's nuclear program, but it seems that Israel and the U.S. are planning to do something with Iran, maybe about Iran's nuclear missiles program, but nobody knows about the details of it. But in general, what we are seeing is that something is going to happen in the next few days when U.S. carriers and aircraft carriers get to the Middle East.
Okay, great stuff. Thanks very much, Omid. Appreciate your company tonight. Hopefully we'll catch up soon. gbnews.com/yoursay. Glynis, hello Glynis, good evening to you. You've said, Ben, the Iranian man who was hit on the head by the Met, I think you're referencing to the protest in London, he was 70 years old. Jamie as well said he was 70. Yeah, in my book, poor bloke by the way, in my book that's not old, 70 is still pretty young.
Definitely.
Especially these days, you agree?
Definitely.
Yeah? Yeah, I think you can be in pretty good shape at 70. Let's have a reminder of the Crown Prince, Reza Pahlavi, who was in Washington, D.C. yesterday. I managed to ask him a question about why the fall of the Islamic regime in Iran was so important for not just Iran, but for Britain too. This is what he said. Thank you. Ben Leo from GB News in London. We have lots of Iranian activity in the UK connected with the regime here in Iran. Why is it in Britain's interests and the West's for this regime to fall?
Right. Well, I'm glad you asked the question, because in fact one of the topics that I raised in some discussions I had the last time I was in London with former prime ministers was exactly to explain to them the mapping of every instrument that the regime is using under Khamenei's direct supervision through so-called centers through which they antagonize British citizens and, of course, many of those sleeper cells that you indicated. It doesn't stop in England, by the way. They are in America as well. So we're trying to explain to various governments the whole methodology that the regime is using with assets they have on the ground in respective countries, not to mention money laundering that goes on in many countries, including in Great Britain. So there are many ways that they can push back against that and protect not only the citizenry of whether it's Great Britain or America, but in what way it connects to why we need to do that ultimately by putting an end to the regime. And one thing that is now becoming even more clear, and the fact that the regime could be threatening the world as a last gasp. We should not allow this regime to catch a second wind and be able to do further damage, which is why the strike is not just needed to help the Iranian people overcome this unfair disadvantage, but it's also one way to completely dismantle the regime's aspect of threatening and cut off the chain of income that it uses to fund all of these operations, including the sleeper cells, which is why I'm also calling for any means to cut off the lifeline to the regime, which is its revenue from whether it's oil exports or whether other means of income that they have. We need to dry the well that funds terrorism once and for all against the Iranian people and the world.
So there we go, Mali. Have you got much of an opinion on this guy, the exiled crown prince?
Well, I mean, I agree with him that we need a new government in Iran. I'm a little skeptical, though. Someone who's been out of the country for decades would have the political and military support to potentially be, jettisoned in there and control the government. I mean, I hope he could, but that seems like a tall task.
He says he's got the support of the Iranians, which I guess, judging by social media, I mean, I've seen thousands of, videos even of them calling his name, calling for his return.
Yeah, but I mean, he hasn't lived there in decades. Like that's a tall task.
They've been chanting his name, and I will say, obviously, with his blood and his family and his history, he obviously has a dedication to want to see it a success. And don't forget, what the Ayatollah is doing right now is totally and utterly deflecting. Why? Because they presided over a failed nation. Don't forget, Iran was actually prosperous. And before the Shah fell, of course, there was a lot of corruption, and that has been a concern, obviously, with that family. But remember, they're basically Persians. They're more westernized, and they could be part of the West. They could be prosperous, and their people talk about affordability crisis in the US and what's going on in the UK. I mean, they're literally destitute, the Iranian people. They've been chanting his name, and I think he's better, certainly, than at least what people have been enduring in recent years.
Okay. Lynn, on your side, Lynn Maguire. Hello, Lynn. You said, I watched last night to see the police shoving the protesters against a wall with railings, using their batons to club people. This country has serious problems with two-tier policing. Why did they not show all this enthusiasm when the Palestine terrorist group or the Palestine protesters were out? Shameful. Yeah, I agree.